So ladies and gentlemen, let's introduce ourselves to the domain name system. Very easy concept, just quite a bit to remember. So computers, as you know, like using numbers. Humans, on the other hand, don't like using numbers, they like using names. Computers don't like using names, humans don't like remembering lots of numbers. Therefore, we have a conflict. What we need to do is bridge the two together. And that is what a domain name system will do. So we have the job of a domain name system which resolves names to numbers. So another way of saying it is, it resolves domain names to IP addresses. So if you type in yahoo.com, it'll turn it into its IP address. And that's the job of a domain name system. So for example, I do type in yahoo.com. I haven't been on Yahoo for years. Who goes on Yahoo these days? Anyway, yahoo.com. You type it in. But you don't actually have to use yahoo.com if you know the IP address. But here's your challenge. There are millions of web pages out there. Are you going to remember every single IP address? Think about all those websites you keep going on to. Everyone has about 9 or 10 favorite websites. Are you going to remember off by heart every single IP address for all 10? No. Humans don't like that. So humans like domain names instead. So you type in yahoo.com. It travels to the domain name system. The domain name system has a database where it goes through every domain. So let's say it goes through Google. That says Google, by the way, and it gets its IP address for Google. It'll then have a look. Facebook. So it's simply like a yellow pages, and it'll flick through all the different domain names, BBC, in the world, until it gets to Yahoo. And when it gets to Yahoo, we'll get the IP address 44. I hate writing like this. And it'll send it back to your computer. That is a really simple way of looking at domain name systems. Let's have a look at it in a little bit more detail. But what you need to take away from this is the fact that it does have a table, a database, where it stores all of the different domain names and IP addresses. But let's have a look at it in more detail. So you've got your computer, you type in yahoo.com on your computer. If you've never been on yahoo.com, let's imagine that in our context, in our example, this is going to be the first time you've ever been on yahoo.com, so it's exciting. You type it in. Your computer is searching for it in its own cache memory. So it'll search for it in its cache. After a while, it'll say, no IP found. Fine. Game over. You can't go on yahoo.com. Nuts. Because this is what happens next. What will happen is, you'll send your request to what's called the resolver. And your computer will say, hey, resolver, what is the IP address for yahoo.com? The resolver will check its own cache. And let's imagine that nobody in your area has been on yahoo.com. So it searches for it, and it can't find the IP address either. So the resolver will then pass it on, and it'll pass it on to the root server, and the resolver will go, hey, I've got my friend who's looking for yahoo.com's IP address. Can you help me out, root server? Now what you need to know about the root server is it's got its own IP address. So it's got its own IP address. And the job of the root server is it looks at the top root of a DNS hierarchy. So you need to be able to remember that. It looks at the top root of a DNS hierarchy. You know what? I don't care how messy this looks. It's quicker. And In the world, there are 13 root servers, and they're strategically placed all over the globe. That is the Earth. 12 different organizations own a root server. So let's go through that again. The root server has 13 strategically placed all over the globe, and 12 organizations own a root server. And what will happen is this: the root server will search for the IP address. The root server will never ever know what the IP address is, but what it'll do is it will then, once it's found the information it's looking for, say to the resolver, hey resolver, I don't have it myself, but I can tell you who does have a Yahoo IP address. So that's the job of the root server, to help guide the resolver. So the resolver's like, okay, cool, who do I speak to now? And who's being spoken to? It's called the top level domain server. So that is the top level domain server. So the resolver then goes to this guy and goes, hey, do you know the yahoo.com IP address? Now the top level domain server is responsible for, if you remember in the previous video, top level domains like .com, .net, .org, .uk. Now in this case it's yahoo.com, so the root server knows it's a .com. It says to the resolver, hey resolver, it's a .com, so go and see the name server who's in charge of .coms. So the resolver then says, hey, I know you're a .com, top level domain server, but can you tell me the IP address of Yahoo? The top level domain server says, no, I'm not in charge of names, I just know how to help you out. So the resolver's like, oh my god, this is taking forever. So the top level domain server passes on the information to the resolver again and says, hey, go and speak to my friend, the name server. So the resolver then goes all the way to the name server, and we start again. He'll say, hey, do you know the IP address for Yahoo? The name server knows everything about domains, even their IP address. And that was basically what you saw in the previous video, that table, that database. So let's go right back. So it'll search for it, and it'll go, sure, here you go, and it'll pass it on to the resolver, who will then pass it back onto the computer, and Yahoo is loaded. The computer then will keep the IP address in its cache, so it doesn't have to go through that journey again. The resolver will also keep that IP address in its cache, so it doesn't have to do all of that again.